Good evening. Welcome to North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Lessons of Vietnam show. My name is Bill Dixon. My co-host, Mr. Bob Matthews, who is our educated co-host of 40 years as a teacher. He always asks the hard questions and so forth. I do the fluff part. He does the real stuff. But we're excited tonight to have with us Carrie Turner from right here in North Carolina. He's written a book called Bringing Joseph Hargrove Home. He is the cousin of Joseph Hargrove, and he wrote the book about a battle that took place 2 weeks after Saigon fell. My southern tongue has a hard time with this, but it was the Mayaquez incident where the Cambodians came in and took over quote, a container ship with about 40 hostages, and President Ford sent in the Marines to get the hostages back, and in the process, when everything was over with, so forth, they got back to the ship and realized that they had left 3 Marines on the island, and the island's name was
Kotang.
Off the coast of Cambodia, and we always hear we never leave a man behind, but we left 3 men behind that time. Cary, you were, as I mentioned, you were Joseph Hargrove's cousin.
Yes, sir.
His mother and your mother were sisters, I guess.
No, actually, my mother and Joseph were first cousins.
Oh, okay.
My grandfather and Joseph's father were brothers.
All right. Did you were probably pretty young when he went to Vietnam. How old were you when he went off to Vietnam?
Well, now Joseph was involved in Cambodia.
Yeah.
Lane, his brother, was in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Now Lane, that's right. Okay, so Joseph had not served in Vietnam. It was Lane, and unfortunately, his mother lost 2.
Yes.
Lane was killed in Vietnam.
Lane, he went in January of '68, and April 19th, they were out on patrol, and a landmine went off, and he was hit with the shrapnel, and they took him to the ship, and 3 days later he died from a blood clot.
So the Hargrove family paid a big price for this country.
Yes.
How did you get started doing research on Joseph and so forth? And
well, up until 2006, it was something that was never really discussed in the Hargrove family. You just didn't talk about it. And that October, we were at our Hargrove reunion, and I was sitting with my brother, and I happened to look over at Aunt Charlotte. And, most people have their little groups where they're laughing and carrying on and catching up with the last year's events. And Aunt Charlotte was just to herself staring out the window. And I punched my brother, and I said, "Look at Aunt Charlotte." And imagining what she had been through all these years, not knowing anything, over 30 years. And I decided then and there that I was going to do something. I didn't know what. I didn't know what direction I would head, but I was going to do something.
Okay, and so you started doing research and so forth. Now, when did you go to the island?
That was in 2008. But when Sandy Hargrove, who is the sister-in-law of Joseph, she heard that I was interested in trying to bring Joseph home.
Mm-hmm.
And she called me one afternoon, and she said, I understand you're interested in helping to bring Joe home. That's what she calls him. And I said, yes. And she said, welcome aboard. I will send you everything I've got. So she sent me a folder about 1 inch thick with official reports and things she had done. And she also sent me a paperback book, The Last Battle by Ralph Wetterhon.
Mm-hmm.
So I began to go through the folder first and familiarize myself with everything. And then I started reading Ralph's book, and all this time I had been praying about, if you would just open the door for me, I'll do the rest. If God would just show me a way or what direction I needed to head. And when I started reading Ralph's book, one night it hit me, the symbolism of opening the book was opening the door. And Ralph, in his writings, said where Joseph was, where the grave site was. And so then I knew what direction I needed to go. And that was in February '07. And less than a year later, I was on the island.
Okay. I know you want to call in and ask Carrie some questions. You can call in at 919-518-9773. Be part of the program. Ask Carrie whatever you want to ask him. Make a comment if you want to. It's open to you to do whatever you'd like. He's got a great story, and we'd like for you to be a participant. Don't get so interested that you forget to call in, but call in, and we can talk about it. That was a pretty good commitment to get on a plane and fly into Cambodia, to a place you probably have never heard of or really been to before, and get out and look for, how did you go about doing, even getting started on such a undertaking?
Well, the first thing I realized is I needed to gain support or a way to get more attention, because just by myself it wouldn't be enough. And I had recently been elected as commissioner, and I wrote up a resolution and I presented it to our board of commissioners, and they joined in signing with me to bring Joseph home. And this was based on information that Ralph had given in his book, and knowing the man supposedly that executed Joseph. His name was M. Son. And once it was passed by the board of commissioners, I was good friends with my state representative, Russell Tucker, and I approached him, and he drew up a resolution, and it was passed in the State House, passed 114 to nothing. And from that point on, it really got attention on the state level. And my congressman at that time was Walter Jones. He was working in close with me, and he contacted the Pentagon and was wanting to know if there was another trip scheduled for Cotaine. And just so happened JPAC was scheduling another trip that February of '08. And Walter Jones tried to get me on board as a witness for the family, and they declined. They wouldn't let me. And so I bought a ticket, and I arranged for Ralph Wetterhahn to join me, because he knew all the connections. He had all the contacts, and from that point on, I just followed his lead, Ralph's lead. And we went to Cambodia, and we chartered a boat and went to Cotaine.
For our viewers, tell us who and what JPAC is.
That's Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command. They have teams that go out and search for remains. It could be during the Vietnam era or World War II, or Korea. They go all over looking for remains.
Carrie, what I'd like for you to do is kind of give everybody a background. Tell us a little bit about how we got to the situation, about the capture of the ship and so forth. Give us the background of why Joseph and the other Marines were there.
Okay, I don't claim to be an authority on this, because I try to leave it to those who were involved, and especially those soldiers who were in the battle. So I'll touch it lightly.
All right.
It's my understanding that the Mayaguez left Vietnam. It had a supply or a shipment of different items.
Okay.
And en route to, or when it was coming out by Polowai, I think the original statements is that they were seized 12 miles outside of Polowai. But in doing some research, based on the court case where crew members sued Sealand Services, the owner of the Mayaguez, it was revealed that they were under 2 miles from Polowai, and the Khmer Rouge seized the ship. And once it was seized, I guess with and I hate to use this term, sort of the bloody nose we got in Vietnam, President Ford was sort of looking to flex his muscle and to establish a reputation, letting the international people know that we're not going to take it. You know, you're not going to just run over us. And so he sent in Marines to free the hostages.
And from what I understand, when the first group of Marines went in, they with 4 helicopters. 3 of the helicopters were shot down right there in the surf before they even got there.
Yes. On the East Beach, it's knife 31 and knife 23. With knife 31, there was a soldier on that helicopter named Kelton Turner. And in my second trip to Koh Tang, I ran across his dog tag. Mm-hmm. And in the book, I had put, if anyone knows a family member, if they would please let them know I had his dog tag, that I would love to give it to the family. And before the editing, or after the editing process, I actually did make contact with the family. It was 2 of Kelton's sisters, was Carla and Sonia. Mm-hmm. And I flew out to Las Vegas, and I gave the dog tag to the family.
And when the Marines boarded the ship, they discovered that there was nobody there, from what I understand.
Yeah. They had already taken the crew members hostage, and it's my understanding that as the Marines were assaulting the island, that the hostages had been released and were on a ship or a boat headed back to the ship.
Supposedly a Thai fishing boat, and the destroyer picked them up. And from research I had done, that they had part of the Marines on shore and part of them getting ready to go on the shore, and the politicians got involved, which always screws up everything, and tried to stop it, but it was kind of hard to stop it once this got going. We lost a lot of good men in this process, and so forth. And did they give the family any information about how Joseph and the other 2 guys got left, or they didn't go back for them, or just what was the government's point on?
All I know about that is that they did ask for clearance to go back to the island to get the 3, mm-hmm. or rescue the 3, and that they were denied, that they were ordered to get out of Cambodian waters as soon as possible. And that really left a bad taste in the soldiers' mouths, because they really wanted to go back.
Yeah, you don't leave a man behind. That's when you sign up. You know that your buddy's going to come get you if there's any way possible. That's yeah. All right, now we're going back to that. You went to the island the first time with the guy who wrote the book.
Mm-hmm.
What was his name?
Ralph Wetterhorn.
Ralph Wetterhorn. Okay, I think we have a picture of him.
Yeah.
So, you and Ralph are back. Did JPAC work with you at all? The ones who were there? Or?
Yeah, they were working on the West Beach looking for Lonnie, Ashton Lonnie, mm-hmm. and when we came up on them, I was hoping that we could do our own digging and looking for remains, because we were interested in Site 1998, and that would be what we believe was Joseph's site. Mm-hmm. And Jay Silverstein was a real gentleman. He understood our situation, and I remember him coming up to me saying he would break off a few of his crew, and there was a site possibly that would contain 1 or 3 left behind. And he said he felt that's the least that he could do for a woman who gave 2 sons for her country, and I really appreciate that.
Yes.
And I have no problem with any of the members of JPAC who were on the island. They treated me real nice. They were very respectful, friendly. I can't say enough good about them. The problem I have is with the leadership.
Yes. It seems to be all, and I know I have worked over the years with the League of Families, and the information they got and the treatment they've got has not always been the best in the world or most straightforward information. Talking with some of the families and going to some of the meetings and listening to some of the bureaucrats speak, you kind of walk away from those meetings kind of disgusted. And just what's going on and so forth. But
one of Joseph's brothers, not long after this incident happened, contacted the Pentagon and was questioning, has anything came to light? Have you got any new information? And the response he got was, don't you think your time would be better spent comforting your mother at home? And that was the kind of treatment that they got all these years. And
Yeah.
I guess over the years that they just lost hope.
Did you is the island got any natives on it? I mean, like the soldiers that were there that remembered the battle, or?
As a matter of fact, and I should have gave you a picture, but when we were there, Ralph and myself, we were sort of exploring up on the north end, and there are rock crevices there. They're pretty deep. Some of them 8, 12 feet. And we were looking for anything that Joseph, Danny, or Gary might have left behind, like a flak jacket or a helmet or something. And I noticed that we were being followed, off at a distance.
Yeah.
And I told Noma and Ralph, I said, we're being followed. And so Noma went over to this fellow, and he started laughing, and he come back. And this guy came up, and he had an AK-47 strung over his shoulder. And Noma said that General Soyat, who sort of helped arrange us to get on the island, was there. Mm-hmm. And he had instructed this soldier to be our bodyguard, that if anything happened to us, he would hold him accountable. And as we were talking, his name was Pole. And as we were talking, he did fight in the battle. So 30-some years earlier, he was trying to kill my cousin, and then later he was out there to protect me. Mm-hmm. Sort of ironic,
Yeah. So did you find anything, or did you find anything that kind of gave you the idea that maybe this is where it was? I mean,
no, we didn't find anything. There were a few sites where Jay had moved around to dig, and we thought briefly we might have found something, but it wound up being trash.
Well, Cary, with the money that it cost you to fly over there and not finding anything, I had to be a lot of frustration. Anybody else would have probably just given up. And
it was a little frustrating. I remember speaking to Ralph before we left on the first trip, and I said, I'm going home a failure. I'm letting Aunt Charlotte down. And Ralph was one of those kind of people that when you say something, he'll sort of just look for a few seconds. You tell he's thinking about something. And he said, Cary, you don't have a clue. You don't realize what you've done. And I said, what do you mean, Ralph? He said, because of your efforts in North Carolina and getting the State House involved, that there will be families that will benefit from this trip because they had already found some remains, American remains. And so I guess looking at that, then maybe it wasn't a total failure. At least other families did benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. I know we've on one of our previous shows we had some POWs from Hanoi Hilton, and everybody looked at the Sante Raid as being a failure because when they got there to rescue to Sante to rescue the POWs, there was nobody there. But as a result, they started getting better treatment. They brought them in from all the outskirts of Hanoi and brought them into one place. So where a lot of guys had been solitary confinement for years, now they're with other like soldiers and so forth, and their treatment. So every little bit really makes a difference. That ripple effect makes a lot of difference. So you went over there, you didn't find anything, you came back. What did you do when you came back?
I waited to read the specs because Jay said that he would dig site in 1998. Mm-hmm. And my time ran out.
So you said Jay, you mean JPAC?
Jay Silverstein.
Oh, Jay Silverstein, okay.
And I apologize.
Yeah, that's all right. But he was a member of JPAC.
Oh, yeah. Okay. He was the head anthropologist. And after we left, he did dig site 1998. And I read the report on it. I read the specs of how deep, how wide. And I remember talking to Joseph's sister, Pam, and telling about the specs and stuff. And she hung up disappointed. She called back in a few minutes, and she said, Cary, they've done it to Joe again, haven't they? And I said, don't worry, Pam, I'm going to go back. So I already made up my mind I'm going back on a second trip. And to do that, I had to start arranging for how would I come up with the finances. And the people in my community back home around Botankus were very generous. They knew that we were trying to bring home one of our own. And once I raised those funds, then this time I would be going back with my own crew and do my own digging.
Okay. Did anybody give you any heartache about trying to go back and dig yourself, or
Not at all.
that you were messing up?
Not at all. The only incident I had is that I knew I had to have some shuffle screens. Mm-hmm. That's where you pour the dirt in and you shuffle it, and it sifts the remains or whatever from the dirt.
Yeah.
So I sort of prefabbed that. I built it before I left, and I put it in a duffel bag. And when I was going through the airport in Cambodia at Phnom Penh, there was this one guy that stopped me before I walked out of the airport. And he said, "Do you have anything to declare?" And I said, "No, sir." And he reached down and he patted the bag and he felt the boards, the one befores that I had for my shuffleboards. Yeah. He said, "What's that?" I said, "I'm here to dig up my cousin's grave to take his remains home." He said, "Go ahead. No problem."
Yeah. You said you knew the guy's name that was supposed to have killed Joseph. Did you get a chance to meet him, or?
No, not directly, but Noma, my guide and my friend in Cambodia, he went into the village where M. Son was, and through internet, I could ask the question, M. Son would answer, and Noma would send it back. So that's the way we communicated.
Yeah. Was it anybody having speculate how long the three Marines lasted after they were left?
Well, we've heard different stories, and the one that I seen is the most likely, is that Joseph was killed the next morning.
Next morning?
And Danny and Gary were captured maybe a week and a half after, and taken to the mainland, and there they were executed.
Okay. What up? Give me some. You went back the second time. What did you do the second time back with your own crew?
We went back to site in 1998, and looking at the specs, and JPAC might have dug about 10 inches in depth. And I was not going to be satisfied until I went 3 feet or thereabouts. And to JPAC, they'll probably say, well, that was inexperience and just a loss of time or whatever. But when I dug 3 feet down, I knew without a doubt he was not there. There was no doubt.
Yeah.
But while I was there, I got a lead on a bunker site that was close by the water hole. And based on the story of what Ralph Wetterhahn could gather, is that the morning after the battle, there was about 5 Khmer who were going down to the water hole. There's that one freshwater hole there. Mm-hmm. And to describe the hole, the water divides meadow from the brush or the jungle. And the Khmer were going down in the meadow side. It's about a 20-foot slope. And as they were going down this slope, they heard noise in the brush on the opposite side. And when they started to move in on it, they were opened up with small arms fire, and their captain was killed. And they fought this individual until he ran out of ammo, and that was Joseph, believed to be Joseph. And when they ran up to where he was down, and they came up with the gun. He had his hands up saying, "Toshi, don't shoot." And they motioned for him to get up, and they noticed he couldn't because he had been wounded above the knee. And they said it was a dry wound, which would indicate the night before. Yeah. And they helped him up and took him maybe 30 yards and met up with M. Son. And when they told M. Son what had happened, it just so happened that the man that Joseph killed was M. Son's best friend. And so he executed him right on the spot.
Now, did they say whether they buried him, or they left the body there, or just
buried him right there?
They did bury him right there.
Yeah.
They give you an indication about where that spot was. I mean, if you were at the water hole, it should be.
Well, back in 2001, when Ralph was there, M. Son led them to a spot. Mm-hmm. Later, it would prove, and he admitted that he lied about the location because he started having second thoughts because of possible war crimes.
Yeah.
And so he just led them to a fake site. And in 2010, Ralph went back, and they convinced Son to go back. And he told them, he admitted that he had not been truthful about the site, and that he would lead them to the actual site. And see, Son hadn't been back on the island in all those years, and he was not aware of all the digging that had been done. And he led them right straight to the site where my witnesses said that they dug up the American remains. I have 6 witnesses that
there were some remains dug up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happened to those remains?
Well, what the witnesses said is that they dug up a grave site that contained 4 sets of remains. And they said 3 were Asian, 1, their words were, American. And here's where it starts getting controversial, is unknown to JPAC, they hire soldiers on the island, Cambodian soldiers on the island, to help dig. 2 of them could speak English. So they were listening to everything JPAC members were saying. And one of the comments made was, when they got to this 1 set of remains, they said, this is the most perfect set of remains I've ever uncovered in my career. And as they kept going and brushing, it was also noted that this soldier had been wounded above the knee. The bone was shattered. And then later it was noted that a bullet entry to the skull, and one of the members of JPAC said that it appears to be an execution. And if you start looking at the description of Joseph, I mean, it fits.
Yeah.
And 2, later it was pointed out that the teeth were smooth. Joseph didn't have any dental work. No cavities.
Yeah.
But so here comes the controversy is that 18 months after the fact, JPAC invites Ralph Wetterhahn to go to Hawaii and view pictures of the remains. So when Ralph comes back, he says they were all Asian. And I sort of figured that's what they would say. And when Ralph started to describe, I said, wait a minute, Ralph, let me describe 3 sets of Asian remains. And I described them, and I said, is that accurate? He said, yeah. He said, how did you know? I said, well, I only told you about the American remains. My witnesses told me, too, about the Asian remains. And I said, well, Ralph, now you tell me, how can my witnesses be totally or so accurate on 3 sets of remains and be totally wrong on the 4th set? He said, I don't know. I said, I do. But then there was more evidence that came out, is that they said that 3 sets of the remains were white in color. The 4th set was a yellowish orange or dingy brown, which was consistent with the other American remains found on the island. But yet when Ralph goes to Hawaii and sees them, they're all white. Why would that 4th set change?
Yeah.
So there's some things here that don't add up. And I just want answers.
Yeah. So this time, on your second trip, I guess you were, and when you got, now, with that information that you just shared with us, did you get that before the first trip or at the second trip?
Well, on the second trip, we got a lead on the bunker site, and we didn't find anything there, so I'm going home empty-handed. I go by and see the island commander, and I thank him for letting me come on the island. They're very, I like their mannerism. You show a lot of respect. And so he asked me would I give 4 of his soldiers rides back to the mainland. They were on leave, and it's about a 4-hour boat ride. So we're about an hour into the boat ride, and one of the soldiers recognized me from being there the year before.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And he asked Noma, my guide, what was I doing back on the island? And he said, well, he's looking at his cousin who was the executed American. And the guy got a puzzled look on his face, and he said, they found him last year. So Noma called and said, Cary, you better come up and hear this. So I go up, and Noma's interpreting and telling me, and this is what the guy told me about listening to the anthropologist, listening to members of JPAC, mm-hmm. and what was said about the remains. And even to those on the island, it's always been an issue of where's the executed American. So those guys were familiar with the executed American or what happened back in 75. And that was the best thing I did, was giving those 4 soldiers rides back, because then it gave me something else, like another round. Here we go, you know. And, when I came back to Compom Sum, I didn't want to lose the information, so I emailed my wife. And I said, if anything happens to me, make sure my congressman gets this. Well, I said Walter Jones.
Yeah.
And she read it, and she thought, Walter? He meant Ralph. So she sends it to Ralph Wetterhunt. And when I'm coming through Los Angeles airport, I have a night layover. And I called Ralph, and I said, I got something you would like to get a picture of. I had Kelton Turner's dog tag. And he said, well, I'm only 45 minutes away. How about I come and pick you up and you spend the night with me? I said, okay. So he picks me up, and we're riding back to his house. And he says, this is really huge. This is really huge. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the American remains. I said, how do you know about it, Ralph? He said, Janet emailed me and told me about it. I said, well, I didn't want you to know until I could see you face to face, because I didn't want anybody else to know, especially JPAC.
Yeah.
And he sort of gritted his teeth, and I said, tell me you hadn't emailed anybody. He said, I did. I said, who? It was a member of JPAC. I said, they're the last ones I wanted to know, because when I went up to Washington, I wanted to be able to confront them and read the body language. And that's one thing I learned while I was a commissioner. Yeah. You read the body language and pay a lot of attention to what they didn't say. Yeah. And anyway, when he had emailed a member of JPAC, and he asked, he said, in the 08 mission, did you recover any additional remains other than those that we were aware of when we were on the island? My sources in Cambodia tells me you did. And this member of JPAC emailed back, who's your source? That's it. He asked the question, who's your source?
Well, this is Carrie's book. I know you want to get one. You can't sit there. We're going to be able to sit again. But this is Carrie's book, and I know you want to get one and read in more in detail. I'm looking forward to digging into it more. We're going to go a little slide series here that Carrie is able to going to tell you a little bit about. And we're going to try the book again. Upside down? It's supposed to be? Okay, it's round. But that's the book, and I know you want to rush out and get one. When does it come out officially?
The official release date is the 29th of April.
29th of April.
But
so
you can
pre-order it, and during the little slide series we're going to have, there's an address that you can get, and yes, the water's
shimmering. Like,
it looks
water's
like it's really
shimmering.
It's a magic book there.
I might get seasick. Yeah.
But Carrie's going to tell you a little bit about what you're looking at as we go, and when we come back live, my co-host Bob Matthews will be sitting in my chair and give him a chance to visit with Carrie a little bit. I'd like to talk to him for another couple of hours, but we kind of limited in time, but must be.
These are the pictures of the 3 Marines left behind. From left to right is Gary Hall, Danny Marshall, and my cousin Joseph Hargrove. I think that's one of the pictures. Okay, on the left here that's Aunt Charlotte. That's Joseph's mother. That was at our family reunion. She was very comical in her old age. She didn't mean to be funny, but she was just naturally funny. You could go eat with her at a restaurant, and she would keep you laughing constantly. She had told my mother just before she died, and it was one of the most cherished compliments I've ever had in my life. She was speaking to my mother, and she said, "I can honestly say I have met one gentleman in my lifetime, and that was your son."
Wow.
And I cherished the compliment.
Yes.
On the right is Lane Hargrove, who was Joseph's brother. He died in Vietnam in April of '68. And these are school pictures. On the left is Joseph, and on the right is Grant Rich, his best friend, who happens to live here in Raleigh. The book opens up with some from childhood stories that are very humorous, so it will give you more insight on Joseph and how his personality was. This is an aerial view of the northern part of the island of Koh Tang. You can see where the path that cuts across. Down at the bottom left, that white line actually is about a 3-foot wall of coral. And this was the landing zone, the extraction point for the Marines. On the left is where I'm assembling our shuffle screens, where we would put the dirt in and to try to sift to find remains. And the other is the 2008 JPAC team. On my left is the author of The Last Battle, Ralph Wetterhahn. Definitely a big help on my first trip. He's my mentor.
Sure.
I called him leader. And on the right is Linda Miller. She kept members of JPAC in line. She was the whip cracker.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Kelton Turner's dog tag. As I said earlier, I did contact members of the family, his 2 sisters in Las Vegas, and that dog tag now is in possession of the family. And on the right is the guy. His name actually is Vanna, but he had a nickname Wanai, and he's the one that found the dog tag on the East Beach, tangled in some cloth, like a backpack cloth that had been worn. This is on the West Beach at Joseph's gunnery position to the right of the perimeter. And moments after this picture was taken, I got a hit with the metal detector. And if you look right below me, you'll see Wanai. He was digging up things with a machete. He would get up cartridges and things like that. And so he came over when I got this hit, and he rims out and he breaks a little piece off about the size of a 50-cent piece. And he looks, now he can't speak English. And he looks at it, and he looks back at the hole, and he looks at it, and all of a sudden he looks at me, and his eyes get real big, and he jumps back, and he says, "Claymore." He couldn't speak English, but he could say Claymore.
He could say Claymore.
Yeah. This is at the bunker site. We thought we had a lead, but it proved to be false. This is about maybe 30 feet from the water hole. So from the water hole to where Joseph was killed and buried, we're right in the middle, right in between. Okay.
Okay.
This is at the bunker site. We thought the way the fiberglass pieces were in there, it looked just like a set of ribs, but it proved to be trash. And to the right there was my crew, the digging crew, the soldiers in the back row. On the front to the left is Baloy, who claimed to be my personal bodyguard. Next to me on the left is Mum, and to my right is Wee How. On the left is Ralph Wetterhahn, and moments before this picture was taken, we were walking along in the jungle, and I had told Ralph we might not only need to be looking on the ground, we need to be looking up in the brush for snakes. And so he's calling for me. So I go up, and he says, "What do you see?" So I'm looking, thinking that he is talking. He might have found a helmet or a flak jacket or something. I said, I don't see anything. And he looked sort of frustrated. He said, what did you just tell me? I said, we might need to be looking for snakes. He said, yeah. So I looked, and if you look just past his head to the left, that little tuft of brush, then that's a blow up on the right of that little tuft. There's a golden tree snake in there. And for those who are viewing this, can you see the snake? And that is about face level, just right to strike you in the face. So I thought that was interesting.
That's your attention.
Yes, sir. And this is my last night in Compom Sum, saying my goodbyes. I invited, the year before, I had 2 different boat crews, and I invited them all to come in. And this was a big event for them, because a meal for them is no more than a palm full. And we had about 7 different entrees out. And the way they eat, they just dip out on their plates. Everybody shares. And a humorous story here is, if you look, the gentleman on the left in the orange shirt, that's Captain Howell on my first trip. We took his boat. And just beside him is or right beside me. And my glass was empty. I was drinking Coca-Cola. And they were drinking Encore, which looks like Coca-Cola. And he thought that I was out of beer, so he pours beer in it. And his father scolds him. And he gets up and he gets the glass, and he goes and gets a Coca-Cola and a new glass and pours it. I mean, that's how much respect he had for me. And if you look a little further, it's Kim Nguyen, who was a Khmer Rouge soldier, and it was his platoon that seized the Mayaguez. And when I guess the beer started talking, but he stood up and he said something, and all at the same time, every one of them at the table looked at me, and I said, uh-oh. You know, I was getting sort of worried. And Noma translated for me. He said, Kim say, he's sorry about what happened to your cousin Joseph, that if Joseph was anything like me, then a good man was killed. Wow. And that was a valuable, I cherish that.
You should.
They're good people. You couldn't help but fall in love with these guys. The one on the right is Mum. And then Baloy, who claimed to be my bodyguard, I had found out on my first trip, Baloy got $5 for being with us all week. And Mum was with us. So I told Noma to just tell them, hang around after everybody leaves. And once they left, I gave them $50 apiece. And instantly, Mum got on his knees and wrapped his arms around my knees. And Baloy grabbed me by the arm, and I looked over to Noma, saying, Noma, tell him I wish they wouldn't do that. And Baloy kissed me on the cheek. And he said, you don't understand. This is the most sincere form of thankfulness. And so I was so touched by it, I said, Noma, ask them, would they like a bag of rice? If they do, come back in the morning, and we'll go buy them big bags of rice. It would feed their family for a year. And so he asked them, and they shook their head, yes. Humorous thing. So the next morning, Baloy's already out there before we even get out. And I sort of laughed, and I told Noma, I said, ask Baloy, does he want to go with us? So he jumps in the van. It's a Mercedes van, and that's a big deal to them. So he's up there real tall, like, you know. So we go to this market, and it's like a flea market that's real crowded. And we're walking down this narrow aisle, and Baloy keeps bumping into me. And he comes up to about here, you know, real short fella, probably 80 pounds soaking wet. And I said, Noma, tell Baloy to spread out and give me some room to walk. And he told Baloy, and Baloy sort of put that chest out, and he said something. Noma started laughing. I said, what? He said, Baloy say, he your bodyguard. So
He's guarding your body.
Yeah, so we went on up, and I let them pick out the rice, and we loaded it up. I mean, this Baloy, he was grabbing 100-pound bags of rice just like it was sponges. And I said, bodyguard. You know,
There you go.
So they're good people. They are so thankful for the least little thing you give them. And that's the book cover.
There you go.
What the book is about is it starts out with some humorous stories about Joseph in his childhood years, and to give you a little insight on what his character was. And then it's followed up about my decision, and I break the book down where the chapters are by years. So you can go into each year and what month, and it's basically you're sort of a travel log, but yet not. I hope it's what the people are looking for. I've had a lot of good compliments on it already. Even Fred Morris from the Cotaine Beach Club he said he really liked it.
Fred Morris.
Yes, sir. I was wondering how the Cotaine Beach Club would receive it. So, Fred, that really, really meant a lot to me.
It's a very, very interesting segue with Fred Morris there.
You want to say something about Stars and Stripes?
Yeah, if I would like to mention some articles recently on Stars and Stripes. Thanks to Matt Birk, we have been conversing back and forth through emails, and he's not only has he became a good friend, but a very valuable ally. He came across or had a letter that's called an internal memo in JPAC that was written by Jay Silverstein, and it has pointed out some things that JPAC hasn't been following procedure and things like that. And it also, what really got my attention in this letter is that he pointed out that in 1991, when the head investigator went over to Cotaine and they were looking at sites 1998 A and B. Now, B is on the mainland, and A, I think, or I believe, is Joseph's gravesite, the executed American, to be accurate. And he pointed out that this investigator filled out reports on B, but on A, he failed to do some reports, and said that this was there was very valuable evidence at this site, and because of the reports, that it sort of messed it up. But then he also pointed out that this same individual, after the fact, received considerable raises and promotions far beyond his colleagues. So me reading between the lines, and I'm probably one of my weak points. I read between the lines a lot.
We all do.
If you have somebody that might have tampered, well, I got to choose my words carefully here. Can't say tampered.
Influenced.
If he accidentally changed the evidence,
Yes.
then was this raises, or the raises and promotions rewards, or were they actually promotions? And you got to ask yourself the question from my standpoint,
Sure you do.
and this being my cousin, and why was it? Well, you can use the word favoritism,
Oh, yeah.
because why did he exceed his colleagues? And the real kicker, or what really irritates me, is this individual was the son of a past president of our local Mount Olive College at home, one of our own. So I hope he hears this.
Well, Cary, thank you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for
My name is
having
Bob
me.
Matthews. We're back now with some live questions. And Cary, as Bill mentioned before, I've taught the lessons of Vietnam for a long time in North Carolina and around the country. And you and I talked briefly before the show. And the Mayaguez incident is one of those holes in our course that no one really has enough information to ask good questions. And you have been wonderful tonight with the information you've done.
Thank you.
And my hat is off to you. That comes off very often, but it's off to you.
Thanks,
About
sir.
what you've done for your cousin. And let me ask you a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
The other two men you've mentioned several times, Gary Hall and Danny Marshall. During all your investigations, have you kept in contact with their families?
I briefly spoke with his sister, Danny Marshall. How can I say this in a gentlemanly way? I don't think she trusted me too much,
Okay,
so I just left it at that.
sure. And I noticed all three men are in the same section of the wall in Washington, D.C., which you visited, I'm sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the best case scenario for you, for your quest, would be, of course, to identify Joseph's remains and have a proper burial. Now, when do you think you anticipate this being done?
That depends on JPAC. I guess if I could say any one thing to JPAC
Okay.
is that I don't care how they do it. If it takes another trip to Cotang to say that they found the remains, I just want him home, the end results.
There you go.
That's all I want, because
Sure.
that's a promise I made to his mother,
Uh-huh.
and that'll be a promise fulfilled. And once if I even hear he's on his way home, I'll be quiet. I'm through with it. I've done it.
Mission accomplished.
Yes, sir.
Now, as Bill mentioned in the first part of the show, as of today, with May 26th, you have been working on this for how long now?
Well, I started it, I would have to say officially, February of '07.
And you've been back twice.
Yes, sir.
Do you anticipate a third visit?
I had a gentleman, Michael Barnes from the UK. He has read the book, and he gave me about 8 compliments on it. That was very impressive, because he's renowned. He does documentaries in the United Kingdom, and he asked would I consider going back to Cotang for another documentary that he wanted to sort of focus on the book, and so that's a possibility. I would really love to go back at least to see my friends.
Sure, sure. Now, when you mentioned before, you're doing it for Joseph, of course, and your entire family.
Yes, sir.
Now, as far as JPAC, you mentioned to Bill a little bit earlier on the show, you don't seem to be overly impressed with JPAC.
Not the leadership, because when I got this information on the boat ride
Sure.
about the remains being uncovered, when I got home about a month later, the following month, I went up to the briefing of the families with Joseph's sister and brother. And when we got there, Joseph's widow was there. She wasn't expecting us. And I also arranged for my congressman's assistant to be with us as a witness.
Sure.
But he had family that came in for that weekend, and so he had to leave by lunchtime, and they had us scheduled for 3:30 to be briefed. So I had to try to arrange an earlier meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I got up with Miss Hattie Johnson, who works with the Pentagon, and she said, well, let me see if I can speak with Tom Holland. So she went and spoke with him about an earlier meeting. She came back and she said, here's how the conversation went. I asked Mr. Holland, could he meet with you? And he said, well, I don't have time right now. And she said, well, I really think you need to meet with Mr. Turner because he's been to Cotang twice.
Yes.
He says, well, we have nothing to talk about because we didn't find anything. And I said, Miss Johnson, you already told me what I need to know.
Sure.
Because he's not telling the truth. I was on the East Beach when they found the remains of Daniel Benedette in the flak jacket. And besides, I had a letter on my person that Johnny Webb had signed and sent to my congressman saying they found 4 samples, 4 separate samples. So I knew he wasn't telling the truth. She said, well, let me go speak with Johnny Webb. So Johnny agreed to it, and we met at 11:30. We go in, and there's about 5 or 6 members of JPAC, real friendly, shaking hands and giving me cards, but this one individual, he's on the other side of the table, and he writes his last name on paper and throws it across the table, like he resented the fact that I was even there.
Wow.
And it had Rosen wrote on it. He didn't even have his first name on it. I looked later and got his first name, David Rosen. And he started out the conversation, or the meeting. He said, Mr. Turner, we understand that you've been to Cotang. I said, yes, sir, I have. We understand that you've been twice. I said, yes, sir. We also understand that you've kept records. I said, well, I kept journals.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
He said, could we get a copy of those journals? I said, no, sir, you can't. He says, why not?
I like this guy.
I said, because I don't trust you or the government.
Whoa.
And then I knew they wanted my witnesses' names because
Sure,
they already heard about this. But Joseph's widow spoke right up, and she said, not me, I trust y'all. And I thought in my mind, why do you trust them? They haven't done anything in over 30 years.
Yeah.
But I didn't say anything to her.
Right.
And so he said, well, we need a copy of those journals, like he was going to manhandle me. And I said, well, you're not going to get them. And I could feel the heat coming off my face. And so Johnny Webb held his hand out to him And he saw him, so he leaned back. And I looked over at Mr. Webb, and Mr. Webb, exact words, Mr. Turner, if you think there's anything we need to be made aware of, I give you my word I'll look into it. And I was already mad with Rosen now. I said, Mr. Webb, you're giving your word to a Southerner. Do you know what weight it carries when you give your word to a Southerner? I wasn't expecting this. He put both elbows on the table and he leaned forward and looked at me. He said, yes, I do. I'm from Texas. And
That's a good story.
I almost started to back up. But I stared at him and I was looking and I said, either he's telling me the truth or he's got one heck of a poker face.
Yes.
And when I looked at him, he didn't flinch, and I didn't flinch, and nobody said anything for about 15 or 20 seconds. And I said, okay. So I started telling him, and I told him almost everything. I held one thing back.
Names.
There's something very identifying about the skull. And I wouldn't give, only my wife knows. I wouldn't give that to anybody because when I see it, I'll know whether those are the ones they dug up or not. But anyway, once we got through this meeting, the thing that really sticks in my mind is while I was talking, David Rosen now is over on there and he's just taking notes just as fast as he can and he's shaking his head. And he looks up at me once in a while just like two boxers over in the corners of the ring staring at each other. And I said, boy.
Here we go.
But what really stuck in my mind is just before we adjourned that meeting, David Rosen now says, I have one last question to Miss Hargrove before we leave. And he looks at her and he says, Miss Hargrove, should you receive any remains, what would you do with them? Without even taking a breath, she said, I want him buried in Arlington. And I backed out in my chair and I looked down at the table because I knew that killed any chance we had. Too much publicity. One of the three left behind comes home. National publicity, people will start probing and wanting to know more about this. And that's not what the powers that be wants. They don't want that.
Exactly.
So, but why would he ask that question? That's none of his concern. But when I looked up, I looked at him and he was looking over at Johnny Webb and Johnny Webb was looking at him.
I got you.
And body language told me they know something.
Sure.
What? I can't tell you, but they know something.
Again, folks, our guest tonight is Mr. Carrie Turner, who's written a book, Bringing Home Joseph Hargrove. Please call if you have any questions or comments at 919-518-9773. Mr. Carrie Turner, mission not quite accomplished, but you've done a lot of good things.
We're getting there.
Yes, you are. Now, as far as your plans the next, let's say, calendar year, can you kind of lay those out for us?
I've been blessed because at times when it looks like I've played out, something else would fall in my lap, so I can hardly wait to see what this year brings. I'm just going with the flow, and it's like this is meant to be. It's a good thing.
Good things. Well, I was telling you earlier, Carrie, that we have read your cousin's name at our ceremony downtown Raleigh, as you know, for years and years and years. And we were teaching the Vietnam course when it first got started. We needed a connection to the students because a teacher can come in like me or a vet can come in and talk. But until they know someone that's a POW or MIA, we started to connect. We started to issue all the students bracelets. And Joseph Hargrove's bracelet was given to probably the best student I've ever taught, named Matt Heim. And Matt Heim now is a major in the armed services. And I emailed him before the show tonight. He's down now in Bolivia.
Huh?
Yeah. I emailed him and told him you're going to be on. He knows part of this story. And he's a good source, and he asks the best questions about things like this. And he asked me to ask you, he asked questions in class like this. I was thinking, it's probably a question he would ask. Is you said your end result, the end game is proper burial for Joseph Hargrove.
Yes, sir.
You nixed Arlington. Where would you like him buried?
That's his wife's call. She's made it very clear she wants him in Arlington. She has said that more than once, not just in that meeting. So that's her call.
Okay. As I look over what's happened with this, and the Mayaguez. We seem to not have the whole story on the mission of the Mayaguez. It seems like, not that people don't know enough about it, they know nothing about it. You start talking about the Mayaguez, you look it up, they talk about possibly losing, did we lose 33 or 34 men in this whole incident?
It's my understanding there was 41.
41.
Because you had one helicopter where 23 were killed that crashed security force before the battle was even fought.
And this was called the last official battle of the Vietnam War.
Yes, sir.
Well, what in the world, if we know this now, what in the world was the Mayaguez doing there?
If, for those of you who are listening, if you'd like to look up the Paust article in the Boston Law College,
Okay.
this gentleman, Jordan Paust, did a review on it. And he just flat out said that there was secret cargo on that ship. And he started putting in some factors of why was this ship painted black?
Yes, yes.
Why did it have computer equipment on there and a secret code book? Things that an ordinary ship wouldn't have. And why, in the court case, it came out instead of them being 12 miles outside Polowai, they were under 2 miles, 1.75 miles from the island. So were they going to make a drop? I don't know. There was speculation that there was a large amount of weapons and ammunition to be dropped to help overthrow Pol Pot.
Okay.
And also there was speculation that there could have been a number of containers of heroin backed by, you know who.
I do know who.
Yeah, that's how they fund their operations.
Uh-huh.
But that's speculation.
Sure.
Until you have someone who was there that will come forward and break the code of silence, you can speculate all you want to.
Well, Cary, when you do your research, like I did today, and of course you've done for years, and you get the photographs that are available of the Mayaguez, it looks like a simple container ship taking cargo somewhere.
Yes, sir.
And the whole thing exploded like this, and then you pick up a history book, look up the Mayaguez, there's nothing there. It's like it never happened.
Yep. I know that on one of the statements made by one of the survivors of the battle, that he had an acquaintance that was in military intelligence, and he was going to look up the top secret file on cocaine. It was gone. Disappeared. This story is, there are powers that be who have been fighting this thing and trying to keep it quiet all these years. And until you can get a trail and start tracing and see who they are. They've been mighty clever about being concealed.
Well, Cary, I'm going to ask you a tough question, okay, if you don't mind. As we get to the end of the show tonight, and people may be calling in, or as Bill said before, maybe they're just listening, they don't know what to ask. But when you were overdoing this, looking for Joseph Hargrove's remains, and continue your research, do you ever fear for your safety?
That thought was just on my mind about whether I'm going to get home tonight or not.
You get home tonight.
It would be easy to read things into it, like Lieutenant Brims, who was the chopper pilot, the last chopper to leave the island. He died in a test piloting accident in the mid-'80s. In my book, there are 3 individuals who stumbled across some information who were there, and they decided they would go public with it a few years back. And shortly after they got together and decided they would do it, is one conveniently died of a heart attack. Mm-hmm. Another disappeared. The family don't know where he is. Nobody. And then the third individual believes he's been injected with a blood pathogen that's eaten his liver. And I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. Is when I did an interview with the Jacksonville Daily News over by Camp Lejeune, maybe 2 weeks after I did the interview, I got a call from the lady, Molly Dewitt. She did the interview. Mm-hmm. And she said, Mr. Turner, you might find this interesting. She got a call from Phnom Penh and a fellow by the name of Adam Harju. And he was inquiring, said he had read the article and was wanting to know if she could provide him with a list of my sources. She said, no, I can't. And I thanked her.
Sure.
And once I got that information, I emailed Noma, my buddy in Cambodia, and I asked him to go to the newspapers in Phnom Penh and see if any such person exists. We couldn't find one. So I assumed it was fictitious. But about a year later, I'm laying in bed about 3:30 one morning, couldn't sleep, one of those many nights, thinking about Joseph. So I get up and Adam Hargrove pops in my mind, so I go on the internet and put in a name, and boom, it comes right up. It shows a picture of him where he had been thrown out of a third-story building onto 118th Street, dead, laying out in the street, hit head first, blood laying there. And I said, good gracious, could this have anything to do with what he was pursuing? Or I do know that he did come out with some articles or some, I guess he was a freelance reporter or something, and he bashed the Cambodian government. So it could have been them, or who knows. It's just getting a little too close.
Well, Cary, you mentioned it a couple of times with Bill, and when you were talking before with the slides about a man named M. Son, who you've never met. Now, about how old would M. Son be today?
He would be, 5, 6, 7, 62, 61, 62.
And he is the man allegedly that killed Joseph.
He has confessed to it.
Now, if you had your druthers, would you like to meet him?
Oh, yes. I don't harbor any ill feelings towards him. It's our government. If they had waited, instead of trying to flex their muscles, just waited one more day, or even a few hours, nobody would have died that day.
Wow.
I think Ford acted sort of quick, but now here's my inexperience talking. I'm not, for those who are in the military, they know what it is, and me, I've never experienced it, so who am I to speak? All I know is that if they'd have waited one more day, nobody would have died. The hostages would have been released. Everything would have been fine. Their ship would have been secretly secured. Everything would have been fine.
We could just turn back the hands of time sometimes.
I wish I could.
I wish you could, too. Well, I'm going to turn the show back over to Mr. Bill Dixon for another endorsement of your book. And I'd like to thank you again, Cary, for being on tonight.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
for
having me.
Very enlightening. Very enlightening. Bringing Joseph home. And one reminder for everybody. Friday is National Vietnam Veterans Day. We have a ceremony downtown Raleigh at our memorial at 6 o'clock. We'll be reading names. We invite everyone to come down and join us if we can.
This PM.
6 p.m., correct. That would be Saturday, right? Now, we'd also like to thank you for listening tonight. And if you get a chance, look for this book, Bringing Home Joseph Hargrove. Be part of your collection. It'd be a great read.
Are we still on?
We're still on.
It's all about getting the word out, and hopefully that this book will find its way into the hands of someone who has enough clout that they can do something about it. It's not about the money. It's
Cary,
about
would you give us the email or the address to find out?
TatePublishing.com.
TatePublishing.com.
Yeah, you can get an e-card or you can get the book. So it's about spreading the word.
Yes, it is.
Monica says, great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
I try to be tactful, but at the same time, don't pull any punches.
No.
Oh,
Well, you know,
sorry,
yeah,
folks.
you were tactful, and sometimes you shouldn't pull punches. Tell the truth.
Well, that's
When we started teaching the lessons of Vietnam, that was one of the concepts of all the teachers, all the veterans that come in. That we would answer all the questions that the students would ask. We would always tell the truth, and hope it would spark more questions. Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? And as Bill has mentioned several times on his show, one of the hardest things to talk about was the POW MIA issue. Period. The whole idea of it, because there was so much misinformation. You don't know who to believe. You don't know what questions to ask. You don't know if you're going to bruise anyone's feelings. And all of a sudden you talk about JPAC and League of Families and so forth, and you get a lot of frustrated people. A lot of people waiting and waiting and waiting. And how long do you wait? I guess the answer is forever.
Yeah. I mean, in our case, we're on 39 years this May. And I guess the only satisfaction I've had is when I came back on the second trip, I told Aunt Charlotte that I honestly believe that he was at Hickam Field, that they have him, he's coming home. And a couple months later, she died. She had been in and out of the hospital holding on. And Joseph's sister told me she honestly believed that that's all her mother needed to hear. He was on his way home and she could let go.
Sure. Now, have you had a chance to go to the lab in Hawaii?
No, sir, they don't seem to care too much about inviting me. They wanted to invite Ralph.
Okay.
Because they knew that if they could convince Ralph's the big threat. He's the journalist. He's a renowned journalist. Me, I'm nobody.
No, I wouldn't say that.
If they could divide us, then they've conquered. But I'm not going away.
No.
I just want him home, and when they say he's on his way, I'll keep my mouth shut. It's over. If they had answered questions and Johnny Webb had followed up like he said he would, this book probably would have never been published.
Wow.
So thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.
That way I publish a book.
Thank you, and good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Reawaken Your Brilliance with Julie Seibert, and if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals. ThatVidBlasterGuy.com, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.